The title of area A of our syllabus is called Strategic Planning and Control. Strategic planning and control. So there's some strategic planning models here that we're going to look at. And on the side of control, there's only one item really, which is here, which we want to dismantle first. So we're going to start by dismantling this area. And in this area, it is in this area where we have the aspect of control. Performance management and control of the organization. So what is it that is expected from us? There are only two items here, which you want to deal with this afternoon. Evaluate the strengths and the weaknesses of alternative budgeting models and compare such techniques as fixed, flexible, rolling, activity-based, zero-based, and incremental. So here what we're looking at, you are people who must be able to evaluate a budgeting system which a company has adopted. You must be able to evaluate the budgeting system that a company has adopted by telling us the advantages and disadvantages. Okay. Evaluate the budgeting system by telling us what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages, and which one seems to be a suitable system for a given environment. So here your role is not to prepare budgets per se, no. Your role is to evaluate whether a particular budgeting system is suitable or not. On top of that, linked to our responsibility accounting, remember responsibility accounting, what is one of the items that we spoke about a lot? Controllability. That KPIs must be controllable. We should not evaluate people's performance on what they cannot control. So the issue of controllability comes in part B. Evaluate the different types of budget variances and how these lead to issues in planning and control organizations. Yes, we know that if we give our managers variances over which they have no control, that will simply demotivate them. The intended goal of the variance will not be achieved. Okay. So those are the issues that we'll be discussing here. So this afternoon, we want to kill this item that is off our way. Yeah, and we get ready for possible questions in the area of budgeting, what we call control here. So that's the area we zero in on. So that is, yes, please.
The notes, I cannot open the notes. I think Daniel cannot open as well. The
Oh,
notes you sent.
Oh, the notes that I sent, eh? Okay, let me just pause the recording and let's see. Okay, so now we can go to our notes. Huh? We can now go to our notes. So that is the area of the syllabus that we are looking at there. Okay, evaluate the strengths, weaknesses of alternative budgeting systems, and also evaluate different types of budget variances. In terms of the exam, here are some of the questions that we have seen. Using the data in the appendices, recalculate current year's budget to the end of the current year and briefly comment on the overall impact of this on the expected operating profit for the year. Evaluate whether a move from traditional incremental budgeting to a system of rolling budgets would be appropriate for dairy and luxury divisions. This is where the issue of evaluation comes in. And you telling us whether a particular budgeting system is appropriate in a given environment. So a move from incremental, so what is incremental budgeting, to a system of rolling budgets would be appropriate. So we need to carry out that evaluation. In 2019, let's review the question there. Evaluate whether CRC should move from current budgeting to activity-based budgeting. Should they move? Whatever the current budgeting system is, you will find it in the question, and it's part of our discussion this afternoon. Complete the analyst's work in Appendix 1 as required by the board and explain the variances between the budget costs and the actual cost for each receipt in the goods inwards for July 20X5. So that is an example of the question there. You can see they're almost talking about the same thing, isn't it? They're both talking of the same thing. Eh? Let us now start our discussion on budgeting. The role of budgeting in performance management. So where does budgeting come into performance management? How would you answer that question? Well, budgets convert the strategic plans into specific targets. Now, throughout our course of study, we have seen that the issue of targets is an important one here. Remember that on Wednesday, we're looking at the question involving what? VBM. And one of the steps there was the setting of targets. You also may remember that when we looked at the HRM, the issue of targets came up. You may remember that when we looked at the building block model, we saw that the first block was standard, or really what we can also call the target. So what we see is that performance management really hovers the concept of a target. Because when you say that, have you done well or not? We're talking about the good performance. Or failure to perform. When talking about good performance, or indeed poor performance, what is our yardstick? Our yardstick is some target that we have set. and the fact that this target has not been met. Now, if you look at this statement, it's fundamental. Budgets convert strategic plans into specific targets. So that's the role of budgeting performance. Much more specific targets. In terms of the whole cycle, if you noticed, we have said that the starting point in any objective setting process is, first of all, must have what? Mission statement. And throughout this course, we have seen the role of the mission statement in performance management. So before we can even talk about the budget, we go back to the basics, which is the mission, where we've got the overall direction. It's from here that now we come up with the strategic objectives, how the mission will be achieved. Now, once we have strategic objectives, how are we going to achieve these objectives? We need a strategic plan. How objectives will be pursued, how the objectives will be achieved. And from there, now we come up with the budgets. These are short-term plans and targets to fulfill the strategic objectives. So you can see then that budgets fit in very well in this performance management framework. Performance management framework. And that is a framework there. And budgets come at the end of that framework. Let's now answer a common question or address a common question. What are the uses of budgeting? What are the advantages of budgeting? What are the benefits of budgeting? In other words, if you have to evaluate the budget, you may have to talk about the advantages. You may have to talk about the benefits. So uses of budgeting, number one, how would an organization benefit from having a budget? Well, it ensures that organization objectives are achieved. And that means good performance, isn't it? A budget compels planning. It forces an organization to plan. It's a communication of ideas and the plans from senior management, from the board, to the people who work in the organizations or to the executives. So an approved budget helps as a tool for communication. Orderliness is very important to ensure that the resources are used effectively. So for resources to be used effectively, orderliness is important, and the budget can help to coordinate activities. The budget is used to allocate the resources. We know that resources are quite expensive. And if you look at most of the models that we have covered, for instance, if you think about the performance pyramid, the building block, what is it that comes out? What comes out is the efficient usage of resources. So the tool that we can use to ensure that resources are used effectively, efficiently, is the budget. Authorizes expenditure. every expenditure should be authorized. And an approved budget is a list of approved expenses. This is a word now which is part of your vocabulary. Responsibility accounting. Responsibility accounting. So budgeting provides a framework. It provides a structure on which you can apply your responsibility accounting. Those budget centers can actually be adopted as what? Responsibility centers. Those budget centers can be adopted as responsibility centers. Those budget holders are the ones whom we're going to take as what? Responsibility holders. So an organization that has introduced budgeting, it has laid a very strong framework or groundwork for what? For responsibility accounting. Establishes a system of control. You know, for objectives to be achieved, control is very important. You know about it. Provides a basis of performance evaluation. We can evaluate the performance of our managers, of our responsibility centers using budgets. It motivates employees to improve performance. So these points that we cover here are very important because we are saying that if somebody was thinking of introducing a budgeting or budget control system, these are some of the advantages. Our syllabus specifically talks about the alternative budgeting systems. And these include incremental, zero-based budget, rolling budget, flex budget, activity-based budget. And also the top-down and bottom-up when it comes to the subject, which is very important, which we came across in the building block, and that is participation. When it comes to subject of participation, these two are important. Remember, we said when we spoke about standards, the building block model, we spoke about the concept of ownership. But this is very important for standards. And that brings us the concept of participation when budgets are being developed. So the purposes of budgeting are there. We have repeated them so that you can also read through. Let's talk about the top-down versus bottom-up approach in budgeting. This relates the issue of ownership of standards. Top-down budgeting, budgets are prepared centrally by senior management. This should help to ensure that budgets are consistent with an organization's long-term objectives and should help to ensure coordination and avoid inconsistencies between the budgets of different departments. That's the advantage, isn't it? Because you're coming from the top. Problem? Yes. A significant drawback of top-down budgeting is that local budget holders do not have any opportunity to participate in the budgeting process. Instead, they have their budget imposed on them, which will not improve their motivation to achieve their budget targets. So that's the problem there. What of bottom up? Local managers prepare their own budgets or at least participate in the budget setting process prior to budgets being reviewed and approved by senior management. Advantage: managers should be motivated to achieve their budgets if they have been involved in setting them. Equally, local managers should have better knowledge than senior management of the conditions their business units face down there. Benefit: as a result, the targets and information in the resulting budget should be more realistic and achievable. However, bottom-up could lead to dysfunctional behavior as local managers focus on the individual concerns of their business units rather than the overall corporate objectives. Further, equally, managers may create vital slack and set budgets which are too easy to achieve. So that's the sample evaluation. So this is an evaluation of these two approaches, which cover the concept of the level to which participation should be allowed in the budgeting process. These are some of the things we want to look at for in our questions when we're talking about the approach to budgeting. Yeah? Now we have seen in one of the questions, what was the question talking about? Incremental budgeting, isn't it? Incremental approach. So what does incremental approach say? An incremental budget starts with the previous period's budget or actual results and adds or subtracts an increment amount to cover inflation and other known changes. For some reason that we have noticed, our examiner normally wants us to comment on this. Why? Because that's what we call the traditional approach. That's what we call the traditional approach. So by and large, that's the approach which is followed. So to come up with a budget for next year, we just take what has already happened, the actual, and you add the proportion, or sometimes subtract to cover inflation and other known changes. Is this a suitable approach? Answer: it is suitable for stable businesses. If we are operating in a very stable environment, where costs are not expected to change significantly, you can use that approach. There should be good cost control in place. Meaning, those actual figures should reflect good level of efficiency. So if you say, okay, my actual figure for fuel on which I'll base next year's budget is $4,000. If this reflects only fuel that was used on company business, and which was under monitoring, and this was monitored, then we are saying that it's okay, we can start from there. But if there was no good control, if these include wasteful expenditure, then we are saying that no, this may not be a good starting point. There should be limited discretionary costs. Those costs incurred at the discretion of the manager. What are the advantages? It's the quickest and easiest way or method. If we made an assumption that the historic figures are acceptable, everybody says okay, only the increment needs to be justified. Avoid reinventing the wheel. I mean, we've been running the business for some years. We know what our actual costs look like year in, year out. We know what our actual costs look like. So why do you want to throw away that information on your budgeting? However, this method tends to build in previous problems and efficiencies. So if there's any inefficiencies reflected here, we'll simply carry them forward. Assuming that what we do next year starts with what we did last year or currently, we are saying there's a room for uneconomic activities to be continued. Managers may spend up to their budget to ensure that they get an increment from the highest possible base figure in the following year. Since managers know that the budgets for next year, the starting point is the actuals for this year. So they'll make sure that they use up all the resources so that the actual is as packed as possible. Give them most likely a leverage for the following year. So this is a very common budgeting approach. We have seen it in questions where a company is using incremental budgets, and then we're thinking of, can we switch to another method? Can we switch to another method? We are looking at more and more. What's just a repetition there? You can throw that one away. Question: how do we correct the shortfalls in the incremental budgeting process? Well, one of the possibilities is to take a zero-based approach. ZBB is a method of budgeting that requires each cost element to be specifically justified, as all the activities to which the budget relates were undertaken for the first time. So before we start discussions and negotiations, or without approval, the budget allowance is at zero. So we're starting from zero, and then what do? We build up. We build up our budget. So when is this approach good? Fast-moving businesses and industries where things are changing and changing, you cannot assume that what we are doing currently is a starting point for next year. We can't assume that what we are doing is a starting point for next year. So if we are working in a very fast-changing environment, we can't make an assumption. This question is such as research and development, because we need to justify this. Public sector organizations such as local authorities. Want to ensure that is what? There's efficiency. Want to ensure that there's efficiency. Let's reflect on some advantages and disadvantages. Number one, inefficient or obsolete operations can be identified and discontinued with this approach, isn't it? The approach leads to increased staff involvement at all levels. This should lead to better communication motivation. This method enables us to respond to changes in the business environment. Knowledge and understanding of the cost behavior patterns of the organization would be enhanced. Resources should be allocated efficiently and economically if we introduce this approach. Are there challenges? Yes. One we can think about is time that is involved and the costs of preparing the budgets will be much more elaborate than for methods that are straightforward. It may emphasize short-term benefits to the detriment of long-term benefits. The budgeting process may become too rigid and the company may not be able to react to unforeseen opportunities or threats. There's a need for management skills that may not be present in the organization, building up of packages and ranking of packages. Managers may feel demotivated due to large amount of time spent on budgeting process. It is difficult to compare and rank completely different types of activity. So in zero-based budgeting is we come up with packages and we rank them. Now the ranking will not be easy. The rankings of packages may be subjective where the benefits are of a qualitative nature. So our examiner has examined incremental budgeting, activity-based budget, but we haven't seen a zero-based budget. The time now maybe has come for us to see this approach. Now we're going to look at the concept of a rolling budget. Just give me exactly 2 minutes. I'll just pause this. I'll respond to somebody who's called. Let's move to another one. So in 2016, there was a question on a rolling budget. Let's understand what it is. A rolling budget is a budget which is continuously updated. So this is the issue here. By adding a further period, a month or a quarter, on the AS period has expired. Rolling budgets are an attempt to prepare budgets and plans which are more realistic and certain, particularly with regard to price levels by shortening the period between preparing budgets. Instead of preparing a periodic budget annually for the full budget period, there will be budgets every 1, 2, 3, or 4 months. Each of these budgets would plan for the next 12 months so that the current budget is extended by an extra period as the current period ends, hence the name rolling budgets. Meaning we have 2022. Quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. Okay, so what we do is Shortly before 2022 starts, we take the quarter one and convert it into a detailed budget. So this one is quite detailed. The others are more at focus level. When we are nearing the end of quarter two, we sit down and do a review of how activities went in quarter one. And then we're able to update that one, and that one. But since we're taking out this one, we also go in 2023 and we pick quarter one there. So we'll continue doing this. Knock off an area period, add another period there. You add a further period when the area's period has expired. So every time we have a budget for 4 quarters or 12 months, with one of them being more detailed than the others. So when quarter two ends, what happens? You drop quarter two, you use the lessons learned to update this, that, and that. Then you go into 2023 and add quarter two. That's what it means. What are the advantages of rolling a budget every quarter? Sitting down to do a review. Every quarter, adding a period, knocking off a period. What are the advantages? Number one, this constant review helps us to come up with accurate budget. Budgets are going to be much more accurate. Much better information upon which to appraise the performance of management. Why? Because we have what we call up-to-date budgets. The budget will be much more relevant by the end of the traditional budgeting period. It forces management to take budgeting process more seriously. Problems more costly and time consuming. Every 3 months you're doing this, that's a lot of work. An increase in budgeting work may lead to less control of the actual results because you are obsessed more with the planning and planning and planning. There is a possible danger that the budget may become the last budget, plus or minus a bit. That's a human problem. The budget may be demotivating because the targets are changing regularly. It's like you're ever shifting a goalpost. You're shifting the goalpost. People see you budgeting every time and they give them new targets. Maybe that may demotivate them. There's a small question here.
Hello, sir.
Yes, sir.
I also think rolling budget is good for maybe a business that is very volatile, or a business that is affected by a volatile environment.
Yeah, you are right. If you're operating in a very dynamic environment, it's important to review your business. And also, based on what is happening, like now, we have seen that around the world, prices are going up. Everybody is talking about inflation. So maybe when you are going such a phase, it may be necessary to adopt a similar approach till the stability comes in again, comes back. Okay. Yeah. You are right. Now there's a small question here. Quarter one, that was a figure. Quarter two, that was a figure. Quarter three, that's a figure. Quarter four, that's a figure. Total for the year, there we go. Actual sales for quarter one, we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0. Here. The adverse variance is fully explained by competition being more intense than expected and growth being lower than anticipated. The budget committee has proposed that the revised assumption for sales growth should be 3% per quarter for quarter 2, 3, and 4. Update the budget figures for quarters 2 to 4 as appropriate. Okay, as appropriate. So we're going to update that, and we'll see what your figures will look like after that particular update. Let's look at another approach, fixed and flexible. Our syllabus has specifically mentioned.
Sorry, sir.
Yes, please.
So the update, is it going to be on the actual figure, the 3% increment, or on the figure for Q1?
The budget committee has proposed that the revised assumption for sales growth should be 3% per quarter for quarters 2, 3, and 4. I'll leave that to you to tell me what you think. Then I'll tell you.
I think it should be on actual, since that's the actual, that's what is happening. That's the actual. Because if you are still using quarter one is deficient based on the new facts. That there is increased competition and good forecast was above actual good that they saw.
Okay. So we've got one view there. By the end of the lecture, I'll tell you the answer.
Okay, sir.
Fixed and flexible budget. The syllabus, if you noticed, specifically mentioned the fact that we must talk about the fixed and flexible budget. Now I know that you may have come across this in your area studies, but when you look at responsibility accounting and controllability, that becomes a big issue. So yes, the terms are very simple. The terms are very simple, but they are more useful because of what? The concept of responsibility accounting. So what is a fixed budget? What's the definition of a fixed budget? Very simple. Fixed budget is one that is not adjusted to actual volume of output or level of activity attained in the period. This is most unrealistic because the actual levels will almost certainly be different from the levels of activity originally planned. This significantly reduces the value of a fixed budget as a cost control technique, as the actual outputs are different from the budget level. In other words, we're not comparing like with like. Consequently, a fixed budget is more useful as a planning tool than as a control tool. When it comes to control, that may not be very, very good. So therefore, what should we do? Well, the answer is flex the budget. So a flexible budget, however, recognizes the potential uncertainty in actual outputs, that when you actually trade, the actual outputs may be different from what you anticipated. So this system is designed to adjust cost levels according to changes in the actual levels of activity and output. In effect, a flexible budget can be seen as a series of fixed budgets, one for each different level of activity. So for each level of activity, we say let's develop owner budget. So what's the advantage of a flexible budget? What is the advantage of a flexible budget? Should enable better performance evaluation as comparing like with like.
Sorry, sir.
Yes, please.
Sorry. Can you please just give a small example of this flexible? I always struggle to understand what happens then.
Okay. There's a
Before we go to the advantage.
there's an example coming. There's an example.
Okay.
We have built in an example.
Okay, no problem.
Built in an example.
Okay, no problem.
So let us, so that one will come because I know that it's an issue. Performance evaluation should enable better performance evaluation as comparing like with like. What are the disadvantages of flexing a budget? May be perceived by some as moving the goalposts, resulting in demotivation, especially if bonuses are lost despite beating the original budget. Difficulties of splitting costs into fixed and variable elements. For you to flex the budget, you need to go to the basic cost accounting and look at the cost behavior pattern. Cost behavior pattern. As in, which cost is variable? Which cost is fixed? And we know that there are those costs which are semi-variable or semi-fixed. And these now you need to do a split. And that's what we're talking about here. In the long run, it could be argued that all costs are variable. So that is an argument there. We have looked at activity-based costing, activity-based management. Now we are coming to activity-based budgeting. We have looked at activity-based costing. I'm sure we have an idea of how it looks like. Of activity-based budgeting, ABB uses the principles of ABC to estimate the firm's future demand for resources, and hence can help the firm to acquire these resources more efficiently. So some of you may say, wait a minute, so ABB is a form of ABM. The answer is yes, you're right. Remember, ABM is an umbrella term. ABM is an umbrella term referring to all the techniques that use ABC information. all the techniques that use ABC information. For what? For managing the organization. For managing the organization. So this time around, we are saying the same ABC information can be used. Can be used for what purpose? For budgeting. Now, what is at the center of ABC? If we summarize, what's at the center? Activities. Our organization arranged in terms of activities, and within the activities, what do we have? We've got a cost drivers. So we've got activities and we've got cost drivers. So it means that when you're preparing your budgets, what you look at? You look at activities and you look at the number of cost drivers that we're expecting so that we can budget for the resources more accurately. ABC draws attention to the cost of overhead activities. Remember, ABC deals with overheads, which can be a large proportion of total operating costs. And in many businesses, where do you have a big problem? It's the management of overheads. The management of overheads is what can distort the performance of organization. It recognizes that it is activities that drive costs. So here we're saying we must talk about activities. If we can control the causes which are drivers of cost, then costs should be better managed and understood. So remember, what is one of the core uses of budgeting? Control. By focusing on drivers, cost drivers, we can improve that aspect. It provides information for control of activity costs by assuming that they are variable, at least in the longer term. ABB can provide useful information for total quality management environment by relating the cost of an activity to the level of service that is being provided. What are the possible problems? A considerable amount of time and effort might be needed to establish ABB, e.g., to identify the key activities and cost drivers. ABB may not be appropriate for the organization and its activities and cost structures. Have you identified the activities? Not very easy. So ABB might not be appropriate for the organization and its activities and cost structures that you have. It may be difficult to identify clear individual responsibilities for activities. You may find that one activity is covering a number of departments. So take responsibility for an activity that cuts across a number of departments. Because there's a traditional structure. We have a structure. But when we now define activities, find that activities covers a number of departments. It could be argued that in the short term, many overhead costs are not controllable and do not vary directly with changes in the volume of activity for the cost driver. The only cost variances report would be fixed overhead expenditure variances for each activity. And that is very true, eh? That's true. Many overheads, think about labor. Labor in the short, labor-related costs, you may find that they are fixed, really. in the short run. And that's true with many costs. You can't easily change and make a decision. For instance, thinking that you can easily change the cost driver, reduce the cost driver, and reduce the cost. Is it really that easy to reduce the cost driver? So most of the cost action may not be as variable as it is assumed here. Most of these costs are actually fixed. And a number of you, I'm sure you're familiar with that from your environments, that in the short run, most of the costs are stuck with you for different reasons. And the 2019 question apparently was based on activity-based budgeting. Yeah? Yeah, that's what it was based on. This brings us to the concept now of variance analysis. Now, if variances are important performance indicators, variances are important performance indicators, KPI. A variance is a KPI. Go back to responsibility accounting. In which type of centers did we say that variances are a very important KPI? What type of responsibility centers? Do you remember that?
Cost center.
The cost center. If your responsibility centers have been structured as cost centers, what you expect is that there's going to be a report, a performance report. And that performance report will really be a budgetary control report. Do a budgetary control report showing what? The actuals, the budgets, the actual, and the variance. There we are. So that's the way a budget control report will look like, or performance report. What we'll be looking for are the variances. What variances? The cost variances, as well as for other situations, revenue variances. But in the cost center, the focus will be on your cost variances. Now, the learning outcome is evaluate these variances. Are they appropriate? Do you think that the variances are appropriate? So here, you must note the concept of how can we make our variances more effective. Let's pick some ideas here. To start with, for the variance analysis system to be effective, you must break down the variances. So what we have here is a reminder to you from your previous studies. It's a reminder from the previous studies on the sub-variances. Some of us may have forgotten. A sales variance should be split into what? And it becomes more meaningful. A total variance alone is not meaningful. A total material variance is not meaningful. In your evaluation on your comment, you should say a material variance becomes more useful when you split it into what? And what else? The labor variance, the total labor variance is more useful when it is split into what? And what else? A variable overhead variance, total variance, is more useful for performance measurement and management when we split into what? Some of us may have forgotten that the total variable overhead variance is split into what? Expenditure and efficiency. The fixed overhead variance, the total variance, first we split the total into what? And what else? And the volume variance is further split into what? And what else? There we are. So way back, there was a question which had been given where variances were in total and the students were asked to evaluate. And one of the quickest things to point out was that variances which are on a total basis are not very useful because we cannot split responsibility. So they will not help us as much. For instance, when we take material variance, who is responsible for the usage variance? Who is answerable? Who is answerable for a usage variance in an organization? Who should take the blame for that?
Manager.
So is it not production which uses materials? I don't know.
What of price?
It can be affected by
Price.
financial.
Yes.
So we have to find out.
You are right. So the usage variance, the people who are in operations, those working in the factory, the production manager with his team is going to take responsibility, but he cannot take responsibility for the price. Our procurement team is the one that will take responsibility for that. Now that split of responsibility doesn't come up when you have a total variance. Labor is the same. The guys in the factory are going to be responsible for the efficiency. The HR people are the ones who are going to be answerable for the rate. The point is, one area of evaluation is the fact that where the variance is split into sub-components. Unless the actual level of activity and sales in the period are the same as those anticipated in the original budget, a flexed budget adjusted for the actual volume of output and sales should be used as a basis for variance analysis. That's another item coming out. Flexing of budgets helps to improve on the variances. Helps to improve on the variances. Back to our terminology of controllability. Variance analysis and performance management. Now, this is an item that we're interested in, isn't it? When we come across any heading relating a variable to performance management, that is of interest to us. So then, what are the performance management items? One, controllability. Responsibility accounting is based on the principle of controllability. Managers should only be held accountable for those aspects of performance they can control. And we must distinguish between the manager's performance and also the division's performance as a whole. Now, these are the items that we have discussed at length, and all of us are experts on this. So what's the implication of this principle when it comes to variance analysis? How do we apply this? Answer: must take care to identify the controllability and responsibility for each. So already, for instance, we have seen that when we took our material variance, and nicely analyzed in terms of usage and price. We noted that this is the production people. And this is the procurement people. That's what we're talking about. In organizational budgets are set centrally. Assessment of operational managers' performance should be based on operational variances and not planning variances. Another terminology is being introduced here. Another terminology is being introduced here. What is that? The concept of planning and operational variance is being introduced. And we'll be talking about that particular concept now. Improving variance analysis. We can improve our variance analysis further by introducing the planning and operations approach to variances, and also by flexing our budgets. And we can add also by doing what? By sub-analyzing the total variances into the components, individual components. Sub-analyze total variance. This will help to improve the process. Now, we may have forgotten by now what we mean by planning and operations approach to variance analysis. I'm sure by now we may have forgotten what it looks like. So planning and operations approach to variance analysis, what is it all about?